I should be back on video, hopefully. Might move over here. All right. This is the joys of working with video being blind. It's sort of very hard for me to tell. So I use physical locations on my desk and keyboard to line myself up. So sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But we do have software that unfortunately won't work with Zoom running. But that's how I normally start up. So with before I go into any meeting, I use my JAWS screen reader to actually tell me if my face is centered, etc. And the unfortunate part is that the camera can't be shared by two software packages, unless you use something like OBS Studio or something like that. But anyway, that's another technical story. Right, so we're now turning to Shannon Tao. Is that right? Have I said that correctly, Shannon?
Yes, perfect.
Excellent. All right. And Shannon's a designer and has some experience. She's based in Melbourne, but she's up with Narelle today, joining us from sunny Brisbane. It's probably better up here, Shannon. You don't want to know what the temperature is in Melbourne. It's something hideous. Um, so um, Shannon is from the city that I grew up in, and we were just talking about our experiences, and Shannon is going to talk about uh, uh, her experiences and accessibility and pass on some gems. Thank you for joining us, Shannon, and it's all yours. Are you there? Hello?
Just sharing my screen. Hopefully
Excellent.
you
Sorry.
can hopefully you can all see that. I first just wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of the countries that we're all working on today. As Mark said, I'm joining from Brisbane, which is Meanjin, but normally from Wurundjeri. But I am also just so grateful for you all to be here. It's something new that Narelle and I are running, and it's lovely to see some familiar faces. And I'm so grateful for you all to be here today. So, today I'm going to be talking about UX, UI, and accessibility, the perfect trio. This has been something I've been working in for quite some time now, particularly UX and UI and accessibility the last 4 or so years. But I'm going to start off with some basics. So, what we'll be covering today is how to implement UX practices in your own businesses and projects, the importance of asking questions, what data is useful, the relationship between UX, UI, and accessibility, how to be a better advocate, and how UX can be applied to everything, not just websites and apps. So, as I said, we're starting off with basics. Um, Obviously, I don't have the slide order quite memorized. So, for those who haven't met me before, I'm Shannon Towle, the experienced designer of your dreams. And so I've worked with companies large and small over the last 9 years, some of them in the logos towards the bottom of the slide. So HCF, IBM, and I've done a lot of work in the museum space as well. So branding websites. And so, yes, I am wearing a branded jacket because blue and white are some of my signature colors of my brand. And so, yeah, I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about what UX, UI, and accessibility means and what I'll be referring to in this presentation. And for those who aren't able to see, yes, this is a picture of Woody, Buzz Lightyear, and Jessie from the wonderful movie Toy Story 2. So first off, Woody, he is our UX designer. UX designers tend to be leads for projects, so they tend to have the user's best interests at heart. They tend to be quite consistent with their values, so Woody's undying affection for Andy. And yeah, they do a lot in working out the logistics of projects and making it the best experience for everyone. Thank you. Then we have Buzz Lightyear. So, of course, he just screams UI guru with that like flashy arm, the really cool, sleek design. So, UI stands for user interface design. So, that is the visual component of any design. So, UX, user experience, UI, user interface design. Uh, like Buzz in the first movie, he assumed he was a real space ranger, and that wasn't the case. And so user testing is a really good way to test and validate assumptions because obviously he didn't end up being real, but great member of the team anyway. And Jessie as accessibility. So she joined in from the second movie, but probably should have been there all along. Fantastic addition and makes a good partner to any team. And so accessibility can affect both the UX and UI, and I'll go into some of that in deeper detail afterwards. The funny thing about accessibility is it tends to have like far-reaching positive impacts. So there's a lot of inventions that were made specifically for disabled people that are very commonplace now. So some of the examples are the football huddle. It was initially invented back in I think the 1890s, and it was a way to stop deaf football teams like seeing the other teams sign, and so yeah, they could sign and not have their strategy stolen. Or audiobooks, subtitles, curb cuts is a very common example. So those little ramps where there's pedestrian crossings. So very good use case for wheelchair users, but if you have a pram, luggage, very useful as well, and mobility concerns. So today so yeah, the perfect trio. Today I'm going to be taking you through a fictional case study of a toy store called EcoJoy. They started in 2015 and they did have a physical store in Northcote, which is very close to where I live in Melbourne. But due to increased rents, they decided to take the plunge and just do online only the last year. But unfortunately, the owner, Riley, has had hasn't had the best sales. So they've come to us to improve their website because they're worried about out-of-date designs. But normally with these projects, that's not the full story. So we're going to go through their website, look at a bunch of things. And so, yeah, whenever I have a project of any sort, I look at what we're working with before we talk to them. So how do UXers create a good experience? So that's a good question. And we have a bunch of tools at our arsenal. So asking questions, doing interviews, doing workshops with activities, relying on data. These are all things we can do. And so, yeah, we're going to start looking at the website first, and that will give us some ideas of what would be good questions to ask the owner to get more information. So here's the website. It is not great, and I've done that by design. This is pretty hyperbolic, but has some of the common problems that I see across websites. So the first of them being there is the menu order breaks convention. So the logo is on the right-hand side instead of the left, which isn't necessarily a problem. As Alan said, wanting the next button in the same place everywhere, part of WCAG, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, as long as something is in the same place on all pages, it's not generally a problem, but this also breaks UX patterns. And so our brain really loves to, figure out things and have a pattern. So there's reasons that websites tend to follow similar conventions. So logo on the left hand, we tend to read left to right. And so, the actions that you want people to take on the right-hand side tend to be good practice. What else is going on here? So we can see that the color palette doesn't really reflect the product and brand. So when we think EcoJoy, no, we think like, no, eco-friendly toys, as said here. So wooden, all of that. You don't see blue very much in nature, apart from the ocean, but we're not getting things from the ocean. So the blue is a little bit out of place here. So wood grains and neutrals would probably be more appropriate here. And the brand in general kind of looks cheap. We go back. Uh, no, the logo isn't really doing much for us. It looks like it was generated, done in a rush. And that's because it was. And so, yeah, that's something else we can fix as well. One of the other things, and I see this across a lot of websites, is inconsistent photography. So this isn't necessarily a problem, but if you do rely on stock photography and have a lot of photography from different collections, so there's different lightings, different angles, it can just look very inconsistent and make you come across a bit more untrustworthy. So does the company even own the stock? Is it a drop shipping company? So what I recommend if you do use stock photography to keep it minimal, and if you are using it, try and use the same collection. But if you are in e-commerce, a brand photographer that can photograph your products is a pretty worthwhile investment in this case. There is also non-descriptive product titles. So we've got here cutlery set, fake camera, truck, which doesn't really say much. And we've also got some lorem ipsum here, which doesn't mean anything. So with e-commerce, particularly online only, you want to build trust as much as you can, and also allow people to feel really confident in what they're buying. And so, as you'll see, all of these little inconsistencies, they kind of play up in your mind to be. Let me just check the chat. Okay, all good. Yeah, so all of these lead up to not a very favorable impression of the company. So let's see what else is going on. So the text size is too small. So particularly with the sales, so the $39. So with WCAG, while there's not an official decree to have a certain text size, what I do recommend my clients is 18 to 20 pixels as a base size. So that's your body and then headings up from there, and not really anything from under 16. So this is for a couple of reasons. If you have a lot of text on the website, it is easier to read, but also with WCAG, there's some color contrast requirements. And if you do have larger text, there's a little bit more leniency with some colors in it. But no, it's also just for the betterment. Even if you don't have a visual impairment, reading stuff that's teeny tiny isn't a great experience. In this case, the heading structure is also incorrect. It is a prototype, so you'll need to take my word for it in this case. But it does, so headings like H1 to H6. So this is in that HTML markup that Mark was talking about in the first session. So for a lot of builders like Squarespace, people just think it means, oh, H3 is smaller than H1, but it actually has a bit more importance than that. So it can mean the importance on a page, so it does impact SEO. So there should only ever be one H1 per page, and this is the main action. And if you're on Google, that is what that title tends to be. So H1s are quite important, and you have multiple of the rest, but it tends to fold in under itself. So if there's eco-friendly toys, well, H1 in this case would probably be better to be like EcoJoy and like a tagline, and H2 probably the eco-friendly toys, and then H3 being related to that. So under eco-friendly toys, it could be wooden soft toys examples. So they tend to like fold in under each other. So that isn't happening here. And so that impacts SEO, but it also impacts screen readers because that tends to be how people jump around in it. Like just as we would skim down a page, they also skim using a screen reader. And so the headings can really impact and provide context about what they are looking at. Color contrast issues. So there's a couple here. It is a bit hard to see at the size, but I have used a color contrast down the bottom. So this green against the white fails. It fails across everything. So this is what I mean by with the text size 18 pixels and above. That falls under large copy. So if that has a slightly different ratio, if it's a bit more lenient than under that. And so we have a couple of here. Most of them fail. The gray on black passes at the at a larger size. But yeah, there's a lot of fails here with the green on the white, the black on the gray there, and also the white and gray in the input fields. I do recommend using Contrast Checker, which is I think it's W3C tool. And so you can just put in two hex codes and it will tell you very clearly whether it passes or fails. And I'm also in the process of building a tool that tests that on a bulk scale. So you can have up to 8 colors and it will tell you what it if it passes contrast with the others. So there's a matrix. I can show that at the end of a presentation if we have it. It's not quite ready, but there's nothing like it on the market yet. So it's been a real time saver for me, even in its prototype stage. Inconsistent letter case use. So I've got the examples here. So we've got the eco-friendly toys, which is in sentence case. So a capital at the start of each. We've got Arch Stacks, which has the capital, which is a product title. We've got the capital A at the top, and then all lowercase, and then sentence case again, and then all uppercase. So, like with the inconsistent photos, this also it can be a bit taxing on the eye, particularly all capitals if they're used for long sentences. The occasional letter, the occasional word is fine. And sentence case tends to, if used quite often, it really disrupts as you're reading. So above all that, just being consistent can really help with this as well. So whether you know, particularly if you're neurodiverse, like just making things as easy as you can to read, if you have dyslexia, there's a few things we can do. And yeah, I will talk about that a bit more when we see the improvement of this site. Inconsistent font usage as well. So we have quite a few fonts here. In my opinion, as a designer, none of them really go together particularly well, but this is where having your branding guidelines can be really helpful, but limiting it to 2 to 3 fonts tends to be best practice and just being purposeful where they're used. And in my opinion, I would avoid the scripty looking fonts. So get 15% off your first purchase. Very difficult to read. And so there's a good test you can do with font usage. If you do a 1, an uppercase I, and a lowercase L, and if they all look identical, not really good for people with dyslexia or other neurodivergencies. There's some really good typefaces that do offer those differences. And there's also the mirror one. So a P and a Q next to each other, or a B and a D. And so I'll show you an example of that later as well. And so, yeah, there's a lot of fonts here and for not any seemingly good reason. So let's go to the next one. Americanized language. So in the contact form, it has cell phone instead of mobile. So it really stands out in a bad way for like Australians, at least to me. And whilst not the case here, if it is Americanized language in your text, to me, it kind of shouts that it's been generated through ChatGPT without any editing. And so that's also something that you don't want attributed to your website. If you are using generators, at least changing the spelling to English, UK spellings, but ideally you should just be using that as a starting board and doing more editing from there. So yeah. And this also goes the same if you are making the same web page or whatever else you're building for other locations. If you can use native language for each one, and I know avoiding use of slang is also one of the uh, criteria in WCAG as well, just to make sure that people all comprehend it. The address is still listed on the site. So here, 48 High Street, Northgate. So as we mentioned before, they closed their physical store last year. So this is going to cause all sorts of problems for their customers. And as you'll see later, it has. So out of date or incorrect information can also really erode trust on the website, even no, particularly in this case, if it's insinuating people can look at the things in person, but they can't. No clear information about postage. So we are only looking at the homepage. There could be some information on the product, but you'll have to take my word that there isn't. When it comes to e-commerce, postage is a really funny one. And yet again, people want to know all of the details before making the purchase and feeling secure in what they're doing. So the fact that there's no clear information about postage, it is really commonplace to put a banner up the top with some postage information, or at least have a page with FAQs. There's not really much here at all. Let me have a look at the chat again just to see if there's any questions. Great. Yeah, Adam, that is a really good test as well. Yeah, Ill Ocean. And as I mentioned, there's very little information about this website in general. Like it could, for all intents and purposes, be a drop shipping store. I have been very hyperbolic when doing the design and making sure it's had pretty much every mistake that I see. But the fact that there's not an about section, FAQs, any information about the postage, who their supplier is, like any testimonials, all of this makes it quite a risky choice for the customer at the moment. And whilst this is a prototype, if it was on a website, one of the first things you'd be doing to ensure accessibility is tabbing through. This is a quick little test to see how it would react to a screen reader. It is not one for one, but it gives you an idea of what the focus states look like. So if you do an experiment and press tab on your keyboard on any website, ideally it should have a skip to main content button so you can bypass the navigation, because if you're going on each page with a screen reader and you hear it read like home, about, blog, like every time it gets a bit monotonous. So skip to main content button just bypasses that step. But yeah, you can also see the focus state. So as it is going through and like you're tabbing across, it tends to be a good indicator on where you are in the page. And there are default settings for each browser, but some of them can be quite poor depending on the design of your website. So having something a bit more customized that stands out more is a worthy investment there as well. So for this one, you're unable to tab through, so that's pretty good indicator. And one of the other things to watch out for in this test is if you have menus that have a drop down. If you're not able to get into those drop down menus, it means people who use and rely on screen readers won't be able to either. And so what have we learned through this little test here? We've learned that the site doesn't seem that trustworthy and quite risky. And there's definitely some improvements that can be made. But what can we use in addition to this? Because UX is not just looking at a page, writing a list of what's wrong with it. Yes, no, there can be gut feeling, which you can use for it, but other thing that we need is
Where do you
it's
live?
question
City.
time.
Do you have a house?
Apartment.
On a rent?
Rent.
What do you do for a living?
Lots of things.
Where's your office?
I don't have one.
How come?
I don't need one.
Where's your wife?
Don't have one.
How come?
It's a long story.
Do you have kids?
No, I don't.
How come?
It's an even longer story.
Are you my dad's brother?
What's your record for consecutive questions asked?
38.
I'm your dad's brother, all right.
You have much more hair on your nose than my dad.
How nice of you to notice.
I'm a kid, that's my job.
Yeah, so it's time to ask a bunch of questions. So anyone who's worked with me, I know particularly Adam, if he's here, asking questions comes with the job of being in UX. And this is one of the easiest, most cost-effective ways to get information that you need. And yeah, so with this, what I would be asking the owner in this case are like, what are the goals for the website? While we can make assumptions that it would be, to make more sales, like pretty safe bet for e-commerce, but other websites, not as much, can be to create more appointments, to be more informative. People are getting a lot of their work through other methods. It can just be a way there to provide additional authenticity. So asking directly from the horse's mouth, finding out what the goals for the website are, who their target audience is. So yet again, as we're looking through, we have a lot of assumptions, but yeah, this is a way of helping validate those, seeing what sets them apart from their competitors. Toys in particular are quite a saturated market, so seeing that would be great. Seeing what their business goals are for the next like 1 to 10 years, and that can be quite a scary question for some of my clients, but it allows you to get a better picture of things you can do for the website that will help them not just today, but going forward. There's no such thing as just a set once and done website, but just making it easier and like knowing this information up front can avoid some of those headaches in the future. Asking what they like about the site and what they don't like, because that can be really important as well. Like as much as, with the last one, I built it, so I can be highly critical of it. If someone has built it themselves, just being a bit tactful about what they've done, and then that also gives you some room, being like, okay, you might like that, but we can do that in a different way, particularly the branding. And that would be something I'd be asking. I've got that as the last question. If they have a current process for updating the site. And so when it comes to websites as well, as I mentioned, it's not, you can't just do it once and then leave it alone. It won't be a very effective website if you do that. And so working out how they manage it at the moment is also a really good question to ask. And sometimes, particularly with e-commerce, but it can be any websites, integrations can play an impact in what platform you recommend or the way that you design things as well. So in this case, seeing if they have an inventory management system, in newsletters, we'd also be asking a lot of technical information here. So what the site is built on already. There's ways you can find that out without the owner. There's a really good site called builtwith.com, and so that can tell you straight away whether it's Squarespace, WordPress, etc. And then, whilst it may not seem necessarily related to the site, I ask a lot of questions about the business itself. So how do they fulfill orders? Like, what's their process in the back end? That can equate to FAQs, but also just UX is about making the experience better in general, both for the users and the people, that are keeping it running, so the business owners as well. And so asking them about this and asking these sort of questions leads to more opportunities to improve the business. So I did a website earlier this year, and we were talking about their process of making appointments and being like they email us, they make an appointment. Sometimes there's a bit of back and forth, blah, blah, blah. And it ended up that I was able to help them really optimize that process by just making a few tweaks on their Calendly. And they were doing things manually for years. And just by asking those questions, it meant that I could solve a problem with them that they weren't asking me to, but that really demonstrated additional value to them. So just asking a lot of questions in general. And then, yeah, one really key one, are you open to a rebrand? Because I think this brand could use it. And so, yeah, next stage is give me your money, punk, but not really. At this stage, that question should already be answered. I want your data instead. So I have a great quote by me And I say it to pretty much all of my clients. Bury me in data, I will crawl out with what I need. And so what are we looking for here? Some of these may be easier to get than others, but if they have Google Analytics set up, this is some of the information that we want. And what are we looking for here? Google Analytics can be really good for site-specific information. So what pages people are viewing and for how long. Any customer demographic data. It tends to be both only gender and age for Google Analytics. How people are coming to your website, so whether it's a social media campaign, email marketing, etc. So that way you can make tweaks to how you market yourself. Bounce rates. So this is where someone comes onto your site and leaves pretty much straight away. They don't click around. If people are leaving straight away, it's a very clear indicator that maybe there's something wrong with the site speed, or like things aren't working, there may be an error, or they're not getting the information that they need. And on that previous website, very little information, so they can just skim it for a second and be like, not too risky, I'm out of here. And with Google Analytics, you can also find out information about site speeds as well. So if you do have really large images, that can impact loading speeds and therefore impact SEO. For web platform data, so this would be on their platform of choice. For e-commerce, this would usually be a Shopify or WooCommerce, maybe a Square, sometimes Squarespace as well. Most web builders have some aspect of e-commerce, but those are the main ones. And so here we can see cart abandonment data. So if you are adding things to cart and then not finishing your checkout purchase, there wasn't a search bar on the site, but potentially what people are searching for, because that can also be really, really interesting, and figure out how to prioritize certain things. So if people are looking up wooden toys, then highlighting them more on the website can make it easier for them to find it. Sales data, so particularly with e-commerce, like sometimes patterns can be really obvious, and so having a lot in the lead up to the end of financial year. Average spend and customer retention. And so for business data, this doesn't tend to be as tangible and in a spreadsheet, but also looking for patterns. So if people have gone out of their way to give you any feedback about something specific, any common email inquiries, any of that refund and returns information, and also yet again asking what thoughts employees have about the website and updating it, because that can give you some insights on how to improve it for them. There's a few other ways you can get more data. So workshops, questionnaires, interviews. You can also use heat maps and more advanced analytics. So this actually tracks where people are looking on your website. Immersion exercises for some businesses where you may be like, hey, I'm gonna be in your store or your office for like 2 to 3 days and just observe. And I can give you some really good insights as well, depending on the project, as well as some activities. So for e-commerce, card sorting and tree testing are great examples. And they provide really good, if you are looking at chapstick and being like, okay, if people are looking on the website or like looking through the navigation, where would they find that? And so being under health and beauty maybe, or makeup, getting some ideas on that can be really helpful. Clothing retailers specifically. And so we did find out some information about EcoJoy. 62% of their traffic comes from Instagram, which, while great, they're doing something good there, can be kind of risky, constant algorithm changes. So maybe they should spread some of that marketing effort to other avenues as well. And unsurprisingly, for a toy store, a lot of their site visitors are women aged 25 to 45. They use WooCommerce, and so 86% of customers abandoned their carts. This is really high and above the average, and the average is surprisingly high. 70% of customers on average abandon their carts, and so this is really high. Gift Guide and Wooden Toys, if they did have a search bar, are the most searched terms, and most sales occurred in November and December, and the least amount in February. So they can probably do an extra sale then to get some additional sales. And when we talk to them, they don't have many returns, which is great, but they also don't have many sales. And their VA, who's in charge of making the websites, isn't really confident it changes. So that explains the state of the website. And they receive at least one message a month for asking about their physical store. So getting that out of the footer, need to do that ASAP. And so what now? If UX, they can present their findings in a few ways. So it can be presenting in a report or a presentation like this, or go straight into wireframes. And so this is doing an indicative sketch of what the website can look. They're very high level, tend to be black and white. But no, are UXs done yet? No. They tend to work with UX and UI for UX designers tend to work with UI for the rest of the project, and sometimes this is done by the one person, which it usually is in my case. But don't forget, we haven't forgot about Jesse or accessibility, so that's there to make sure that things are still above board for the project. And so EcoJoe, this is the old brand, and this is how it was generated out of logo.com. And so you'll see it hopefully has 3 of the same blues, 2 whites, and it's very basic. And so looking to improve that, we've got this, and this still isn't perfect. It is a Jack in the Box, but with a bird and leaves. The typography is a lot more relevant to their ethos and what they're selling, but this logo wouldn't work well at smaller sizes. And so normally my branding projects, doing a lot more care about that and testing at certain scales, sizes, and then also giving 3 to 4 options so they can be branded in whatever application they need to. And the body copy is a really good typeface called Atkinson Hyperlegible. So this was created by the Atkinson's Association in the US, and all of those tests that we've talked about before with like the 1, lowercase I, and lowercase l, uppercase I, all of them are great with Atkinson's, and it's a very stylish typeface. And so here's the website. We've made some changes, so have included a search bar. We have a big banner on the top that says free shipping over 150, just to make that more clear. We have a few more pages, so home, shop, blog, and contact, because blogs are a really great way to get more eyeballs on your site through SEO, because the more pages, the more opportunity you have. And play today, protect tomorrow, a pretty good slogan for this eco-friendly toy store. People are able to search by collection. They have featured products that people can go to straight away. There's also the ability for people to have reviews. So yet again, building that trust with testimonials. They have a back to school special, 12th of November. Not relevant to back to school. That should be February. And let us help you find a perfect gift, because as we saw in the data that people were searching up gift guide, and so giving the people what they want. You can also search by age, because if you're like me and aren't around kids very much and be like, what do they even like? So this can be helpful for people like me. Testimonials from other parents, and people playing with it. So this is an embed from Instagram of real people using the toys, and just some additional information about the shipping and opportunity to sign up to their mailing list, and most importantly, no address. So I'm biased, but I think this is a very big improvement of what they had already, a lot more professional looking. But I know that looking at the time, it's quickly running out. So is UX just for websites? And the answer to that is No. Whilst UX is very commonly associated with websites and so is UI, that doesn't have to be the case. So I've done a lot of work in the museum space, and so these are three of the projects that I worked on. So whilst they are animated, I have actual photos later. This just shows how they work. So the mathematic is that was in the State Library of Victoria, and so you could pick two items out of a collection, and it would give you a map that had 6 degrees of separation. So if you picked Ned Kelly's armor and a chocolate bar from like a factory that is in rural Victoria, it would show you how they're connected through like different objects. It was a very wonderful piece. Hello Zoo, it was a chatbot that acted as a zookeeper. So we did a lot of training material with like, what are people wanting to ask? And so if there wasn't a zookeeper around, you could ask any question about a crocodile frog. And this could also be constantly updated. And so if we were hearing questions that the chatbot didn't have an answer to, we could update that. And so it was quite dynamic. And then another one at the zoo, Dinos at the Zoo, which I have an image next. It was really great. It was next to animatronic dinosaurs. And so you could tap your little card that you would get at the entrance and it would tell you dinosaur facts. So it was very fun. And here's the real life version of that. That was a really fun project to work on. And last year I did some work for the Holocaust Museum as well. So this is the village, and so it's Little Mock Village, and to tell the stories of 7 Jewish children through World War who eventually emigrated to Australia post-war. And so you could look in their apartments with headphones on, and it would tell you more about their story, about what life was like before the war, during, and after. And so it was quite a compelling piece, and a lot of like sensitivity went into this, as well as user experience with like heights and all of that. But today I'm gonna tell you a little bit more about a day at the races for the last few minutes that I have. So you can see on screen in this experience, you can color in a horse template, you can scan it, name it, and then that horse will magically jump onto the big screen where it races against other visitors' horses. This had so much user experience in it, you would not believe it. So first off, the paper template. So when we were looking at it, there's actually tech embedded in here, if you'd believe it. So bottlenecks was one of their concerns of this experience because they have a lot of school groups that come in. And so ensuring people can get in, do the experience smoothly and get out. This is also unmoderated, so it means there's no staff member present. So it needs to be particularly intuitive. And so there was the decision to, instead of doing the horse templates A4, to do them A5 instead. So this meant it was quicker to color in. They could print it on site if they needed additional ones. It also kind of encouraged people to take it home because it wasn't as big and like didn't need to be folded up as much. And yeah, there's some nice graphics on it to like, yeah, make people feel like it was special. And this little square in the bottom left corner with the horseshoe, whilst this looks decorative, this was actually a really important bit of tech because when it's put into the scanner, it needs to align to the right direction. So if people have done it upside down, like slightly skew if, and so this was the way for the computer to be like, all right, we need to adjust this a little bit more. So all of the coloring you do is nicely shown on the horse. We did some tests with one of the developers' kids to see what materials would work best because we wanted bright colors to show up in the scanner, but also be pretty quick to color in. So we trialed markers, pencils, and crayons. And crayons won because, quick and easy, but they also cleaned off the table and the space quite well because accidents happen or people do it on purpose. Either way, those tables could be cleaned at the end of the day and not trashed. And so here is a few animations from some of the testing phases. So the one on the left-hand side, is what the onboarding took. And so this impacted a lot of the decisions around timings and how many people could race at a time. And so there were some non-negotiables about like how long the scanner took to scan the horse, how would we let people name them? Because if you give people infinite time and infinite options, decision paralysis kind of kicks in. And so the way that this experience worked was there was 2 lists of names and you could just create a combination. So one of my favorites, Inexpensive Pancake, is on screen. And yeah, so with this, it meant that we could have a race every 3 minutes and we could have 6 horses per race, ideally. And so this was good in knowing the information around bottlenecks, all of that sort of thing. In the top right corner, we have the little finishing screen. So this is one of the earlier iterations because I did the animation direction on this experience as well. So since they were paper-looking horses, they could be a little bit more tacky. We didn't end up doing the buck at the end because it was a bit difficult for our developers. We had a little head wobble instead. And then with the booths, because there was not meant to be any mention of gambling for this project, but the bookie booths were the old ones were really nice, kind of tie-in with the experience. And so it created some really fun modular opportunities. So, windows could grow and like condense as required. And we have a couple of other developer tests down the bottom. So we had like 100 horses. It was like this horse circle of death. So yeah, and just because this is a physical experience doesn't mean that the accessibility stuff wasn't considered as well. So you'll see on the left, I actually did the test of making sure all of the colors were contrast friendly. And so the red and the white and the pink and the white, they only just pass. But because this was about 4 meters wide and like very tall, we did have a fair bit of flexibility with that. And what you're seeing on the right is if people do the wrong thing, because we did a lot of testing in that regard as well. So this is actually a set of keys put in the scanner. And so if people who aren't able to see it, it's kind of like a radial gradient. And so, like think a insane pie chart with a bunch of different results. And so we didn't want people to do the wrong thing and damage scanner, but we also, didn't want them to miss out or think it was a mistake if it didn't scan. So if people did scan something they weren't meant to, there was always other background moderation if people drew a penis or a swear word. Our content strategist had a field day doing a whole list of swear words that set off the sensors. Yeah, if you did any of that, then the horse, all of the coloring would be removed and you'd just have the white horse. Just to be like, yeah, no, it is correct. We scanned it in. You've just done the wrong thing. And so, in summary, the UX, so what to consider in your project, ask a bunch of questions. Questions are the most easiest cost-effective way to get information that you need. And I'm very clear with my clients. I'm like, be prepared. You're going to be like bombarded. But it always leads to like such a good result, and particularly if you're asking the right ones. And the great thing is as you start asking them, more will pop up, and it gets the client thinking about questions and like aspects of their business that they haven't had to think about before. So it can be really beneficial for all parties. Use data where possible and use it to validate decisions and assumptions. This doesn't have to be necessarily site specific. There's also some really good use cases for just generalized data. So with the museum worked on. So we've talked about WCAG, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, but there's also the Smithsonian Guidelines for Accessible Exhibition Design. And so this is where there's physical things. And so that goes into more detail about like reach heights if you're using a wheelchair, like making sure there's adequate lighting to be able to read signage, all of that. And so there's some generalized advice around there with heights for things, because yeah, even like where the booth was placed for data races, it's like, okay, you know, it has to be low enough for children, but not low enough for like adults to like hurt their back while scanning. And so some of it's compromises as well, but data, very useful, some more useful than others. Talk to the people who use the product. And this can include the employees and business owners if they're updating it. And so, yeah, that is one of the key things, because you're making things for the people. And so knowing what they need and what they want and not assuming can be really good. And I've found that time and time again. Keep an eye out for opportunities, even if they're not the original priority. And so, you know, for asking all those questions, just, you know, being able to give advice, that's a lot of the time what people are paying for, even if they don't realize. I'm there to look out for the business and, you know, just try to find areas of improvement where possible. And iteration. We haven't talked about it too much, but iteration in design is a pretty natural part. Some of you may have heard of the double diamond technique, but no, design is evolving and growing, and so is WCAG. So, you know, keeping an eye out and making changes where necessary is not a bad thing, and that ensuring that you have the information needed to confidently make that change can be really helpful. And so, if you want to know more about me, some of the services that I offer are website design and improvements, and this was just a short clip of what I go into. Branding, general graphic design, and accessibility compliance. And of course, that installation design if you are wanting something a bit more, with a bit more pizzazz. So I have a few different packages on my website, including Get Shit Done Days, where you can get a day of my time for $1,500. But I have a special offer today that if any of my audit packages are ordered, they get $500 off that, and my audits start from $400, so it's quite a deal. And the QR code is there, and I will put that in the chat after this. But thank you. Any questions? I have seen that there's a lot in the chat, and whilst there's recordings that are going out after, if you do want to see the slides, you can scan the QR code and it will send you to this exact presentation.
Shannon, Caroline had a question. Caroline, do you want to ask the question?
Yeah, sure. It was just about that. It's a very fussy little question, I guess, but it's the font that you used when you were redoing that toy site, and it was for the body font. I can't remember where you said you'd got it from, but I just noticed, I don't know what they're called, but you know, the lines on D's and P's and T's and all those sorts of things, the ones that go down and the ones that go up, they were quite short. And I was just wondering, I always assumed, I know assuming is not a good thing, but I always assumed that having them longer would make it easier to differentiate them between other letters. So how is that, so am I wrong in that assumption? It's the shorter, the better?
Like, I haven't heard much insight on that, actually. There's this really good blog from Vision Australia about typography choices. But for the body copy with Atkinson Hyperlegible, I know, and like I've been that nerd and watched like YouTube videos about the development of this typeface in particular. They did so much research around it, so it would be a pretty safe bet for that body copy in particular. But yeah, when it comes to the ascenders and descenders, that's what the lines are called. I'm not too sure of those exact. But I will look up that blog post and put it in the chat as well.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Minor point, I was just interested. Thanks.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah, look, Shannon, I just wanted to thank you for what you've done. We've got about 4 minutes left. So if there's any other questions, 3, is it? Oh, I'm vision impaired. If there's any other questions.
10:27.
Yep.
So we might move on if everyone's happy to.